I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step. Ryan Holiday is on the show today. It's tough to sum him up in a sentence or two. Let's just say he has a very unique and special mind. This is one of my favorite Why Not Now conversations because I learned so much. Ryan is the author of many books, one of which has had a big impact on me. It's titled Ego is the Enemy. He talks about the difference between being and doing. Do you want to be the important person, or do you want to do the important things? If you currently lean more toward the to-be camp, but you want to be in the to-do camp, you will learn some specific things you can do to make that shift. In this episode, Ryan and I discuss many other things. He tells us about the why not now moments that led him to intentionally drop out of college and the corporate world. And Ryan shares with us advice that he would give to his younger self. Before we get started, I want to tell you about my partners at Design Pickle. You know when you're in a pickle because you need a design, but you don't have the time or maybe even the skill to do it yourself. Many of us have been there. Design Pickle has been a lifesaver for me. Here's how they're set up. You pay a flat rate monthly fee, and you're given a dedicated designer for all of your needs. You heard that right. Unlimited graphic designs, unlimited requests, and the first 14 days are risk-free. You get a full refund if you cancel in the first 2 weeks. Why Not Now listeners like yourself get 30% off their first month. You can go to designpickle.com/why not now to redeem the offer. For me, the process has been painless and ego-free. In fact, many of the posts you're seeing on my social media channels were created by my buddies at Design Pickle, specifically Jacob at Design Pickle. That's what's cool, is that you get a dedicated designer. I'm on a first-name basis with my designer. A mentor once said to me, just because you can doesn't always mean you should. Do what you're uniquely qualified to do. Design Pickle helps me do just that. Go to designpickle.com/why not now to redeem the offer. We tackle the most taboo topics on the Why Not Now show. Oftentimes, you're hearing guests share things they've never shared before. In the spirit of things we don't typically talk about, you should know that the Why Not Now show is supported by Poo-Pourri. Yep, the original before you go toilet spray. It's magic. My friends at Poo-Pourri have literally taken the smell out of you know what. This pure blend of essential oils stops bathroom odor before it begins. Visit poopourri.com, and Why Not Now listeners get 20% off with code Why Not Now. That's all one word. Also, you can now get Poo-Pourri at Target. Ryan, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
I'm so grateful to have you and to be connecting with you. And I have so many questions, but in the spirit of why not now, as things work around here, let's start with the most important one. And that is, will you share a time when you had to ask yourself that question, why not now? And you had a big decision to make, and we'll talk it through.
Sure. I mean, I feel like it's a question I've asked myself probably at most of the big pivotal moments of my life. But if I was trying to think of the first one, when I was 19, might have been 20. I worked for an author. His name was Robert Greene. He's my favorite author. He wrote a book called The 48 Laws of Power. I was sort of an intern, and I had this chance to be his sort of full-time research assistant. I was on my summer break at the end of my sophomore year of college. I also had an internship at a talent agency in Beverly Hills. And sort of at the same time, these sort of two temporary positions offered me, full-time employment. But it came it was not compatible with going back to school. So I'd already, this is towards the end of the summer. I already had the apartment that I was going to move into back in college. My girlfriend was there. What I thought, this is a fun thing, and then I have to go back and I have to do the school stuff, and then I would start my real life. And these things came together, and I had to sort of ask myself, is this what you drop out of college for? What are you going to college for? And one of the things that my mentor, one of the ones who was offering me the jobs, he said to me was like, look, you can go back to school and you can read about the things that we were going to work on together, or you could come now and be a part of them. And that was, so I said, you know what, why would I not do this right now? I could always go back to school. I can always learn on my own, but maybe I can't do this. And so I took the leap, and it completely changed the trajectory of my whole life.
Thank you for sharing that whole why wouldn't I do it now because I can go back. Because a lot of times I hear guests say they ask themselves, what's the worst thing that could happen? And that's kind of, it wasn't the worst thing, but if you end up going back, you have that option. Did you have outside pressures that you felt you needed to stay the course of going back to college because it's what you should do per se, and that whole story that we hear in our heads? Were there any people in your life close to you that you had to try and convince, or was that not really the case?
Well, so first off, there's just the conventional wisdom that, dropping out of college is really scary, and that it's bad, that it could blow up in your face, and your entire life could be different, but only in a negative way. And then there was my parents, who very much bought into that, much more so than I thought they would have, in the sense that I'd talked to them about this like several times, that this might happen, that this was this thing, and we'd had these sort of really interesting open conversations about it, and I thought I had their support. And then when I pulled the trigger on it, they just lost it. And in retrospect, I get that the job of a parent is not necessarily to help you fulfill your potential to its utmost. The main job of a parent is to keep you safe, right? The job of the parent is not to make sure that you have your dream job. The job of a parent is to make sure that you have a job and that you don't starve to death, right? And so they reacted extremely negatively, like to the, I don't want to call it, they disowned me, but that was essentially what happened. We didn't speak for quite some time after this. So yeah, there was an incredible pressure, but there was also incredible good pressure. My girlfriend at the time, who would go on and is now my wife, was sort of like, whatever you want to do, I'll support you. I remember I went and I saw her parents right around the time that this happened. And they were like, good for you. You'll be able to make this happen. And so it was weird to get these sort of two contrasting reactions, one from people who were my actual parents, and the other from basically two total strangers. So there was a lot of sort of inner conflict about that, and it made this very difficult decision much more difficult.
Yeah.
But
I'm just thinking about,
it was not fun.
I can't imagine. I'm thinking about that reaction, and you must have really wanted it, because to have that feedback from parents and to know that there's going to be some distance there as a result of it, was that an indication to you that you were willing to go through that in order to explore this opportunity?
There's that expression, they say, like, it should be hell yes or hell no. And so I like that advice, but when I was thinking about it recently, when I look back at all these, sort of big life-changing decisions that I made another one when I left my sort of corporate career to become a writer. Actually, it was never like that, right? Like I would say I was like 51-49 on it. Like,
Oh, really? This is
yeah,
good.
it in retrospect, there's always, I think, much more clarity about it than there was at the time, if we're being perfectly honest. And so to me, it's like, is there evidence that this is a good idea? Have you considered how it can go wrong? And then are you willing to sort of take that leap into the dark? One of the things that I learned from this experience is, so I would say it was like, I was really close. Like, I remember I had decided not to do it. And then I kind of allowed myself to be convinced to do it at the last second. Like, so I sort of, I like closed my eyes and jumped, right? And I remember this very vividly. I walked into the registrar's office at the college I was going to, where I was on a scholarship that paid for most of my tuition. I actually enjoyed school quite a bit. And I went in there and I said, whatever, I'm here to drop out. Like, what window do I go to?
You're checking the boxes right. You're being a good dropout.
Yeah, you don't just not go, because they still send you the bills. So, and so I went, and the woman's like, there's not like a form for dropping out of college. She's like, that's not a thing. She's like, you take a leave of absence for one semester, and then it just rolls over if you don't come back.
Oh, that sounds better.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, so I'm just taking a leave of absence. And I think, like, people, like, I even think when I left my corporate job to become a writer, I worked myself up to this thing where it's like, I'm ready to pull the ripcord. And then I went, and I made all these plans, and then I went to my boss and I said, look, I'm going to leave to become a writer. And they said, oh, well, what if we just kept paying you as a consultant, but then you never had to come into the office ever again? And I was like, oh, that's great. We often, I guess my point is, we make these things up in our head as being much more drastic than they often actually are. Mm-hmm. The transition is typically more granular than it seems when you're on the wrong side of it. Actually, probably in both directions. And so it's helped me going forward, because I go, oh, these things aren't nearly as drastic as they or they're not as drastic or as permanent or as undoable as they might appear.
Mm-hmm. Great takeaways there. I mean, just the fact that you were open to the possibility that you may not finish college. A lot of people wouldn't have even considered giving that a second look, and this curveball is thrown your way, opportunity to do something. And the fact that you didn't have those blinders on. Adam Grant has been on this show, and he said he got some great advice when he was making a pretty big decision. Or no, he was actually just out of school maybe. And a mentor of his said, it's great that you're very driven and you're very specific on exactly where you want to go in your path. But this is not, I'm not quoting him, but he basically said, and that will get in your way. If you have those blinders on that way, you're going to miss some huge opportunities. And he was really grateful for that advice. But you had that out of the gate. I mean, here, it's great that you mentioned this story, because the fact that you dropped out of college, and then as I'm researching you, Ryan, and I'm familiar with Ego is the Enemy, and that's how I was first introduced to you. Actually, listening to you on the Tim Ferriss podcast was one of the first times I heard you speaking. But I'm researching you, and I go to your Wikipedia page, and I see you're 30 years old, and I'm like, holy buckets. How is this guy only 30? And I feel like you have the wisdom and the miles of a 90-year-old, and I'm trying to piece this together. And I guess what I'm starting to arrive at is this mentality has allowed you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's allowed you to live a lot quickly, because you've done a lot.
I got a little bit of a head start, I guess. So leaving college put me, let's say I had 2 years of college left. Maybe I would have graduated a little bit early, but I got 2 years early, and I think these things tend to compound. I was reading an interesting book a few years ago about like basketball players that go, straight from high school into the pros. You can't do it anymore, but there was this class of athletes that did. And what they found is that there was a learning curve. So you were not as good when you first started because you were so much younger and physically smaller than everyone else. But then when you developed, when all your education and your skills sort of came together, you got it right in your physical prime. So it's like, if a basketball player's physical prime is like 22 to 26, let's say, do you want 22 to 24 to be your introduction to basketball, or do you want to have already learned all those things? And so I think I was very fortunate in taking this risk. How it worked out is that, I learned a bunch of lessons and skills and formed a number of relationships and things that would compound over time. I got them 2 or 3 or 4 years earlier than I might have otherwise gotten them. And it sort of put me on an interesting trajectory. I would say, that was the pro. The con is that, I wasn't always ready for it was an incredible amount of stress and pressure, at 21 and 22, that I was under, that, who knows, I'm sure I will go prematurely gray as much as I was premature in being able to accomplish some of these things.
I get that. It makes sense. And it's kind of you didn't necessarily have a lot of life experience under your belt to know how to deal with some of the things that were happening at that age. But yet again, there you had this social media and technology wave that was happening at the same time, and it's just talk about a perfect storm. So real quick, you mentioned your transition from corporate world into focusing on writing, and that being a big why not now moment. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was there literally a moment?
Yeah, I'm not a big believer in epiphanies, but I remember I worked for these people, and I was the director of marketing at American Apparel by my 21st birthday. And as I sort of worked I'm running marketing for a publicly traded company. It was incredibly exciting and interesting. And I remember I went to this conference, maybe I was 24, might have been 23, I don't remember. But I went to this conference in New York. I was probably the youngest person there. And I was the only one not wearing a suit. It was an advertising conference. I was the only one not wearing a suit. And it struck me as I looked around that most of these people had been my age before, naturally. And that if I came to this conference every year, eventually I would be them, that I would be in a suit. And I didn't want that for some reason. Like, I saw that as being a sort of a form of death or stasis that I did not want. And it's like I saw this thing as a temporary stopover on where I wanted to go. And so it sort of made me think, okay, I've always wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write books. That was how I started in this whole business, was as a research assistant to a writer. And so that I needed to make that leap sooner or later, and that it was going to get harder as time went on. And I ended up making that in, I think, 2011. I moved from Los Angeles to New Orleans, basically sold everything that I owned. My wife and I moved into a 1-bedroom studio apartment. Our expenses were next to nothing. And I sat down and I tried to write a book on spec, and I did, and it ended up selling. But it was this moment where I was dropping out of the sort of corporate trajectory that I was on for a very different lifestyle, just in the way that, dropping out of college was sort of pulling the ripcord on another trajectory.
Interesting. So I have a lot of follow-up questions to this. I mean, first, just the comment of being at a conference and realizing you don't want to become a suit. That right there, the fact that you now kind of correlate that and look back and say that was actually a pretty pivotal realization, because you ended up changing your course. But I think it's a reminder to all of us to listen to those feelings and or listen to those strong thoughts that come through when we're in situations like that, because you could have just brushed that off and then continued, but Sure. It really truly made a mark, and you took action on the fact that something as small and as menial as people wearing something different around you actually changed. So paying attention like that is pretty notable. And then as you you change swim lanes too, right?
Yeah.
And there was a Hollywood agent. I used to be kind of in that world with my first company, and he said to me once, "Amy, stay in your swim lane. You got to stay in your swim lane," because at the time my company was growing, things were great, we're getting a lot of attention, so on and so forth, and I wanted to try something else, not completely, but just experiment into a little bit of a different swim lane. And it stuck with me because I had so much respect for him, but ended up, actually going ahead and trying something else. And I think there's so much conversation and banter about you got to stay in one thing and grow and keep going. And that's how you move up and succeed. But really, innovation is when we start to mix things that haven't been mixed as much before. And so do you think you're going to change swim lanes again?
I might. There's in one of my favorite books. It's The Adventures of Duddy Kravitz. I believe that's the title. I might be getting it wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And there's a line in the book that I like where he says, a child can be many things, but a man can only be one. He murders the others. And I think what it is, the way I see it is that when you're younger, you're all these different things. You want to do a little bit of this and you want to do a little bit of that, but you have to kill off it. You have to, it's a narrowing of the focus. And so it was that I was in two lanes. The way I would see it is not that I changed lanes, but that I was in two lanes and I narrowed it down to one lane, right? Mm-hmm. So I was like a writer. I saw myself as having the potential to be a writer and doing this writing stuff on the side. And then I also had this corporate, job as a marketer, and that I had to decide on one of them. Mm. And so I was eliminating one and zooming in on the writing thing. And so, and in college, maybe college was a third one that so it's this narrowing down, this process of becoming who you're going to become is sort of how I saw it.
Interesting. More like refinement and kind of doubling down on the writing versus interesting.
Yeah, I didn't suddenly pick up physics or something,
Right, that's true. Yeah.
I wasn't, and those things can be very dangerous, I think, where someone's like, look, I'm a doctor, but really my dream is to be a yoga teacher in Thailand. I know I have no experience in this and I haven't laid the groundwork for this in any way, but I'm selling all my things and moving to Bali. Like that, to me, that's where those people wake up and they're like, I've made a huge mistake. To me, this was like, when I dropped out of college, not to go figure out what I wanted to do, but because I had an opportunity and I'd already laid the groundwork for being a writer. Now it was just okay, I'm really going to actually make this bet here.
Now that's a completely different frame. And I appreciate that because that term swim lane isn't, I think it's sometimes, or just stay in your lane or whatever people say, it's overused and I just realized it's actually, if I look back too, every time I've shifted, it hasn't been toward some bizarre area that I'd never been in before. It's more of a gradual energy shift into something that was already there, but just putting more focus into it or something. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Ego is the Enemy because it really meant a lot to me. And it was...
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for writing it. And I had gone through a season of humbling experiences and ended up moving onto a boat and living on a boat for a while. And I think this was my attempt to simplify life, but I took it very literally and realized you don't have to move to a boat to simplify your life. But also, I think partially there was a period of time where, my ego definitely got the best of me. And I think there was a desire and craving to go live on the ocean where I knew how powerful it was. And it was kind of like a realization of how trying to put myself in like ego timeout almost. And so as I was moving, then I decided, my husband and I moved to the forest in South Dakota. So as we're driving, I hear your podcast with one of them. You've probably done many with Tim Ferriss, but you're having a conversation with him. I learn about the book. Then I am literally driving across country. I'm like downloading, of course, listening to the book on Audible. And one of the things, and I've referred back to it many times since, but one of the things that you talk about is, I think his name is John Boyd, and you talk about to be somebody or to do something, to be or to do. Can you zoom in a little bit on that? And I don't want to spend too much time on the book because I know you've talked about it so much in the past, but I just adore it. So to be or to do, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's actually something I learned really early on in my career. I think it was very influential. So John Boyd is maybe the greatest military strategist, sort of the post World War II generation, and he was this sort of tireless fighter of bureaucracy inside the Pentagon, and he was sort of this meticulous groomer of talent. And as he would see all these ambitious young men, mostly young men at that time, come through his office, and as he would sort of groom them and train them and mentor them, he would at some point eventually give them all this speech, and the speech was called the to do or to be speech. And he would basically say, look, you're on this road, and you're going to come to a fork in that road, and one of the directions of the road is going to get you promoted. It's going to get you, important positions. You're going to see your name in the newspaper. You're going to have a lot of, awards on your chest. But it's going to challenge you ethically, right? And then he said, on the other side, there's this path of doing, right? You might be the unsung hero. You might be the deliverer of unpopular news. You might be taking lonely stands about things. And you may, in fact, be punished for making these decisions because you're going to be the squeaky wheel. And he said, so to do or to be? Do you want to be an important person or do you want to do the important things, right? Do you want to symbolize the military or do you want to actually sort of get your hands dirty and make the things happen? And so, I think we can often confuse I'll give you a publishing analogy. The number of authors that I talk to, let's say aspiring authors, who want to have a best-selling book versus the number of them who want to put in the work to make a book that deserves to be a bestseller and then to market it in a legitimate sort of authentic way rather than, let's say, buying this accomplishment is alarmingly small, right? And so I guess what Boyd is saying on how I've tried to live my life is that, look, you can chase the sort of flash and status, or you can dedicate yourself to substance and significance. And I just try to use that as a benchmark in my own life.
I love it. And I think the reason it resonates so much is because I definitely have felt that historically, maybe prior to a couple of years ago, I was in one camp and had a conscious decision to try and really live and be in the other. And so for people who are listening to this right now and they're thinking, wow, like I had that moment of shit, I think I actually have been more of the to be and I don't want to be. How do I shift? Are there any key things you would suggest to them as a first thought on how to look and rearrange?
I think the first sort of, are you being or doing or, however you want to describe it is, sort of what is your relationship to credit, right? Are you someone who obsesses about credit or are you someone who obsesses about results and impact? And, one is about status and the other is about results. And so I think particularly early on in your career, making sure that, you don't care about credit. In fact, can you actually actively work for other people to get credit, right? Can you be a person who contributes thanklessly is a great way to sort of build those habits early on in your life.
I really appreciate, Ryan, your ability to distill and communicate information in a way that's so impactful. Just like that right there. Like, what is your relationship to credit? Boom. Perfect place to start for someone who's wanting to maybe hop the fence from to be to do. Okay, so I have this burning question, and I can't wait to hear more about your neighbor, Richard, who's 112 years old. Is that correct? And the oldest living veteran in America?
Yeah, he's 112 years old. He's about a block and a half away from me. I was actually going to go hopefully see him in a little bit. He now lives on Richard Overton Street. They named it after him, which is pretty cool. But I was reading an article. I live in Austin, and I was reading an article about this guy. His name is Richard. They said he's the oldest living veteran in the United States. And so I just sent. His caretaker is his great grandnephew. So he's outlived basically everyone ever related to him. But he was born in 1906. He was drafted at like 35 or 36. He fought in the Pacific, and he's 112 years old. He sits on his porch and he smokes cigars and drinks whiskey every day. He's sort of living the life. And I've been lucky enough to go and spend some time with him, and it's just been an incredible experience. You're just next to someone who, I met him, I think, shortly after Trump was elected, and not to make a political point, but these are turbulent, chaotic, divisive times. And it was interesting just to, sit next to someone who has just experienced basically all of the chaotic events of the 20th century. And it sort of gives you this sense of, look, no matter how bad things seem right now, there's sort of a rhythm to history, and relax a little bit and sort of take it as it comes. It's been very, very helpful.
Oh, this is the coolest. And so how did you originally get in touch with his caretaker? Did you just reach out over?
Yeah, they were raising money on a Kickstarter campaign for his medical care, or a crowdfunding campaign for his medical care, because like the VA would let him come live in the hospital, but he wants to stay in his house. He built this house in like 1947 or something. He's lived there as almost 70 years. And so I was like, look, I would love to write about this, and we just sort of struck up a friendship.
I love it. So here's a guy who was born when Theodore Roosevelt was president, right?
Yes.
And you might go over and hang out on his porch with him later today. And what are you going to talk about? Do you come with questions? Do you just come to hang out?
No, it's hard to ask him too many questions. He doesn't hear everything, but you sort of, I don't know, it's just very, very peaceful and relaxing. He's just sort of, doing his thing.
That's so cool. Wow. What a neat relationship too, to have that point of view. I loved what you said about history having a rhythm. It gives us a little bit of I feel like we have a little bit of insurance, or just we can maybe not stress so much, knowing that he's been through a thing or two and has some wisdom to share. I have a couple of just quick questions, one-offs, that I'm just curious to get your thoughts on. One of which is, so we just had the Golden Globes, and there's all these rumors about Oprah running in 2020 for president. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I would hope that we wouldn't, address, try to solve one mistake by another mistake. I mean, obviously Oprah's a very successful business person, and seems like a smart lady, but I think what's particularly worrying politically right now is our collapse of norms and sort of reason and principles. And so to me, the way you address those is not by overcompensating in the wrong direction, but by sort of insisting. I mean, I think the solution to a person who's wildly unqualified for office and has no experience is to pick someone who's very qualified for office by nature of the fact that they have a lot of experience and relationships in politics and all these things. But that's just my opinion.
No, I appreciate you sharing. And I definitely didn't mean to get super political. It's just an interesting current event right now.
Sure.
And I really respect your opinion. The book that you're working on now that you said it comes out, did you say March, May?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, it's a bit of a departure from my other books. It sort of connects into the political discussion we're having now, but it's about a conspiracy. This Peter Thiel, the billionaire, the founder of PayPal, the first inventor in Facebook, he spent 10 years sort of in this secret battle against Gawker Media, a website that many people believe to be this sort of unaccountable bully. And, they'd outed him as gay. They'd written a number of really nasty things about other people. He sort of felt like it was this force for evil in the world. And he's set out to destroy them. And ultimately, the ending is public, but ultimately he succeeded. And so it's about, what it means and how it works to sort of set down and have this sort of wildly ambitious, maybe even deranged secret plan to reshape the world. Whether you agree with what he did or not, I'm fascinated by how he did it. And that's sort of what the book's about.
Very interesting. And this is different for you. And intentional decision, clearly. Were you craving a different side of writing, or just that fascinated about the story? What made you give this angle a try?
Well, I think it goes back to your first question of why not now. I had a relationship with a number of the people that were involved in the story, and it sort of fell in my lap. And it was an incredible story, and I felt like I would regret not writing about it. And so it was way out of my depth. It took a huge, it was a risk. It might not work. I think it ultimately made me a much better writer. It was the hardest thing I've written, and so I said, why not? Let's try it. And now I have this book.
There you go. I'm excited to read it. I have a feeling it will read like fiction, and sometimes those are the best, where it's real. You can learn from it, but it's so almost entertaining and captivating. So yeah, good deal. A couple of rapid fire questions,
okay,
and I'll let you off the hook here. Pirates or ninjas? Who's tougher, and why?
That's a good question. I'd probably say pirates, since they travel long distances away from land, whereas ninjas, live at home.
So thanks for the rationale and the backup there. And what are you reading right now?
That is a good question. I just finished a book about Mr. Rogers called I'm So Proud of You, written by one of his friends who had this sort of life-changing relationship with Mr. Rogers before he died. I don't know why I ended up reading him, but it was really fascinating.
Oh, interesting. Wow. What keeps you up at night?
I have a 14, 15-month-old, so mostly that.
Literally, right? Okay,
yes.
Fair enough. And my final question, what advice would you give to your younger self? And you can choose what age that might be.
Oh, yeah, I have an answer. I always just say relax. I when I look back at most of the things that I was upset about or stressed about or worried about, I was just taking things way too seriously. So, and most of what I was worried about or what I, felt was like a matter of life or death really had no impact on, where I've ended up. And so that's always the answer.
That's interesting. And even thinking about your answer earlier with most of your decisions were like 49-51. It wasn't the clear, I knew a 99%. This was the right way to go. If you combine that with relax, knowing that it says a lot about what you've done and where you've come from. So thank you so much for taking the time with me. I'm excited to read your new book, and I just am grateful.
Well, thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins. And of course, a hat tip to Richard Gruer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time. And until then, Why not now?